is a specific kind of loneliness that arrives not when things are going badly, but when things are finally going right. When you have done the work. When you have changed, genuinely changed, not in the superficial way of new habits or new vocabulary, but in the deeper way of how you see, what you can tolerate, what you can no longer pretend not to notice. When the old version of you has quietly stepped aside and something more real has begun to take its place. This is when the loneliness arrives. Not the loneliness of having no one around. The loneliness of being in a room full of people you have known for years and realizing, with a clarity that has no comfortable resolution, that you no longer quite speak the same language. This loneliness has no name in popular culture. The popular culture has names for the loneliness of loss, of failure, of social rejection. It has frameworks for the loneliness of the isolated and the abandoned. But it has almost no language for the loneliness of the person who is growing, who is becoming more real, more integrated, more fully themselves, and who is discovering in the process that growth creates distance. Not because they have decided to leave anyone behind, because the distance is a natural consequence of moving while others are standing still. Because the gap between where you are and where the people around you are is a real gap, and real gaps produce real loneliness, regardless of whether anyone intended them. This essay is about that loneliness, about why it is an almost universal feature of genuine inner development rather than a sign that something has gone wrong, about what the depth tradition understood about it that the modern conversation about growth consistently misses, about the specific psychological dynamics that produce it, and about what to do with it, not how to escape it because it cannot be escaped, but how to inhabit it in a way that allows it to do what it is actually there to do. Let's begin with what is actually happening when this loneliness arrives, because the experience of it is so disorienting that most people misread it entirely. The misreading goes in two directions. The first misreading is that the loneliness means the growth is wrong, that the distance it is creating is a sign that you have taken a wrong turn somewhere, that the real path would have kept you connected, kept the relationships intact, kept the social world functioning in the way it had always functioned. This misreading sends people back. They sand off the new edges. They perform the old self enough to close the gap. They trade the growth for the belonging, and then spend the next several years in the specific misery of a person who knows what they gave up and cannot stop counting the cost. The second misreading is that the loneliness means the people around you are not good enough, that the distance is explained by their limitations, their shallowness, their resistance to growth, their unwillingness to do the work you have done. This misreading is more seductive because it is flattering. It makes the loneliness feel like a quality rather than a cost. And it is not entirely wrong. There are real differences in depth, in development, in the willingness to do inner work, and those differences do create real distance. But the misreading is in the framing. The loneliness is not primarily about them. It is about the gap. And gaps are not moral judgments. Gaps are gaps. The person standing still is not failing. The person moving is not superior. There is a gap, and the gap produces loneliness, and the loneliness is the honest experience of genuine distance between two people who are in different places on the same terrain. The accurate reading of this loneliness, the reading that neither sends you back nor makes you contemptuous, is more difficult and more useful. The accurate reading is that the loneliness is the cost of authenticity, and that costs are real, and that the question is not whether to pay them, but whether what you are buying is worth what you are paying. And what you are buying, when you pay the cost of this loneliness, is the only thing in the human interior that has ever produced lasting satisfaction. You are buying the experience of being finally actually yourself in the full sense of the word, in the depth of the word, in the way that the people who have paid this cost and come out the other side consistently describe as the first time their life felt genuinely theirs. If something in this is pressing on something real in you, take 1 second now and subscribe. The work we do here is for the ones who are in the middle of this, who feel the loneliness and do not yet have the language for it. Subscribe and hit the bell. Let's keep going. There is a psychological mechanism that explains much of the social friction that accompanies genuine growth, and it is one of the most important discoveries of the depth tradition. It is the mechanism of projection, and in the context of growth and social friction, it works in a very specific way. When you change, when you become more yourself, more integrated, more capable of seeing clearly what you previously could not see, you become, for the people around you who have not made the same changes, a mirror. Not a mirror you chose to hold up. A mirror your very presence constitutes. Because what you now embody by virtue of having done the work is the possibility that the work can be done. And that possibility, reflected back at the people who have not done it, produces discomfort. Not always conscious discomfort. Often the discomfort is felt but not named, experienced as a vague irritation with you, a sense that you have become difficult or distant or superior, a feeling that something has shifted in the dynamic that they cannot quite locate. The irritation is not really about you. It is about what you represent to the part of them that knows the work is available and has been declining to do it. Your growth is evidence that the choice is real. And evidence that the choice is real is a specific kind of threat to the person who has been managing their relationship with that choice by treating it as unavailable. As long as you were also not doing the work, the not doing could be framed as the reasonable response to an impossible demand. The moment you do the work, the framing collapses. The demand was not impossible. The work was possible. The not doing was a choice. And the person who has been making that choice, and who now has to look at someone who made the other choice, is looking at the evidence of their own ongoing decision in a form that is very difficult to look at comfortably. This is why growing people are so frequently accused of having become arrogant or cold or difficult or superior by the specific people who knew them before the growth. Not because they have become those things, because the projection of those things onto the growing person is the most available psychological defense against what the growing person's existence is asking the accuser to feel. You cannot feel the discomfort of your own undone work if you have successfully relocated the problem to the person whose done work is making you feel it. And the relocation is fast, and it is automatic, and it feels, from inside the person doing it, exactly like accurate perception. The growing person really does seem arrogant, really does seem cold, really does seem to have become difficult. The perception is sincere. It is also a projection. And it is one of the most consistent features of the social experience of genuine inner development. Understanding this mechanism does not make the loneliness disappear, but it changes its meaning, which changes how it is inhabited. The loneliness produced by projection is not the loneliness of rejection. It is the loneliness of having become visible in a way that most people cannot comfortably look at. And there is a significant difference between those two experiences, between being rejected for who you are and being projected upon because of what your presence asks others to confront. The first is about you. The second is about them, and you are simply the surface it is landing on. This distinction does not eliminate the pain of the dynamic, but it prevents the pain from being absorbed as information about your worth. And the prevention of that absorption is one of the most important psychological moves available to a person navigating the social territory of growth. There is a second mechanism producing the loneliness of growth, and it is less about what other people are doing and more about what you are doing, or more precisely, what you are no longer able to do. Growth, in the depth tradition's understanding, involves the gradual dissolution of the persona, the mask, the social self, the curated and managed version of yourself that interfaces with the world. The persona is not false in a simple sense. It was constructed for real reasons, serves real functions, and is a genuine part of how social life works. But as the integration of the shadow proceeds, as the exiled parts come home, as the constructed self begins to loosen in favor of something more actual, the persona becomes less sustainable. Not because you decide to abandon it, because the actual self, becoming more present and more inhabited, makes the performance of the persona feel increasingly costly and increasingly hollow. This produces a specific social consequence. The relationships and social contexts that were built around the persona begin to feel uncomfortable. The conversations that were sustained by the persona's willingness to perform its role, the cheerful agreement, the manageable opinions, the carefully calibrated self-presentation, become harder to sustain. Not because you have become difficult, because you have become less willing to be someone you are not in order to maintain a social comfort that was always being paid for by your own self-betrayal. And the people and contexts that depended on the persona's performance register this change not as growth but as withdrawal, as coldness, as the loss of the version of you that they were comfortable with. And in the space that the persona used to fill, there is now something that most social environments do not quite know what to do with. The actual person, unmanaged, present without performance, and genuinely simply themselves. This is lonely, not forever and not without remedy. But in the transition, in the period between the dissolution of the old persona and the formation of new relationships that can receive the actual person, it is genuinely, substantially lonely. The old relationships feel hollow. The new ones have not yet formed. The social world that the persona built is still there, but you are no longer quite there in it. And the experience of being in a room full of people you have known for years, performing the rituals of the relationship that was built around who you used to be, with less and less of the energy that the performance requires because more and more of that energy is needed elsewhere, that experience is one of the most distinctive and one of the most consistently reported features of genuine inner development. It is the social texture of individuation. It is what the process feels like from the inside when you are in the middle of it, before the new relationships have formed, before the actual person has found the people who can meet it. Let's talk about what to do with this, because the essay would be incomplete without it, and the practical question is the one that actually matters when you are in the middle of the loneliness rather than reading about it from a comfortable distance. The first thing to do is to resist the two misreadings we described at the beginning with everything you have. The pullback, the impulse to sand off the new edges and perform the old self to close the gap, will be strong, and it will feel like love, and it will feel like loyalty, and it will feel like the reasonable and mature response to the pain of the distance. It is none of those things. It is the fear of loneliness dressed up as consideration for others. And the cost of yielding to it is the specific and permanent cost of betraying the self that the work produced, which is a cost that compounds. Every time you perform the old self to close the gap, you make it harder to inhabit the new self. And the new self, pushed back underground, does not wait patiently. It accumulates. It becomes more urgent. The gap between who you are and who you are performing becomes wider, even as the social gap appears to close, and the interior loneliness that results from that interior gap is worse than the social loneliness of the transition. The second thing to do is to allow the transition to take the time it takes. There is an enormous cultural pressure to resolve ambiguous social situations quickly, to either repair the distance or formally end the relationship, to make things clear and settled and resolved. The transition period of growth does not cooperate with this pressure. It requires a sustained tolerance of ambiguity, of relationships that are neither what they were nor yet what they might become, of a social world that is in a process of reorganization whose outcome you cannot yet see. The tolerance of this ambiguity is itself a practice. And it is a practice that the inner work, if it has been done seriously, begins to make possible. Because the capacity to tolerate ambiguity is a product of the same interior stability that the integration of the shadow builds. The person who is at home in themselves can tolerate the uncertainty of the social transition in a way that the person who is still outsourcing their sense of self to the social environment cannot. The third thing to do is to actively look for the people who can meet the actual person rather than the persona. They exist. They are rarer than the culture suggests, and they are often not in the places where the persona's social world was built. They are in the places where genuine interior work is being done, in conversations that go to the real layer, in relationships where the surface performance is not the primary currency, in encounters where two people who have both paid the cost of becoming themselves recognize each other without needing to perform the recognition. These encounters are less frequent than the social life the persona produced. They are also incomparably more nourishing. One relationship built on actual meeting is worth 100 built on mutual performance. And the finding of those relationships, the patient, unglamorous, sometimes long work of finding the people who can meet the actual person, is one of the most important tasks of the second half of the growth process. The fourth thing, and the most important, is to learn to inhabit the loneliness rather than escape it. This sounds paradoxical, but it is the heart of the matter. The loneliness of growth is not only a cost. It is also a teacher. In the space that the persona's social world used to fill, in the quiet that descends when the performing has stopped and the new relationships have not yet formed, something becomes audible that the noise of the social performance was drowning out. Your own voice, not the curated voice of the persona, the actual voice, the one that knows what you actually want, what you actually think, what actually matters to you, below the layer of what you have been performing, wanting, and thinking and matching. This voice is the whole point. This voice is what the integration was building toward. And it can only be heard in the quiet that the loneliness produces. The people who have been through this transition and come out the other side consistently describe the loneliness of the middle period as, in retrospect, one of the most important experiences of their lives. Not because it was pleasant, it was not, but because it was in the loneliness that they finally heard the voice they had been drowning out for decades with the noise of the social performance. And once heard, the voice does not go back underground. It becomes the compass. And a person with a compass, even one who is alone for a while, is not lost. They are on their way. And the way, followed with patience and without the betrayal of self that the old misreadings demanded, leads to the thing that was always the destination. A life that is genuinely, finally, actually yours. If this reached the part of you that has been in the middle of this transition and did not have a name for it, do something now. Write in the comments these 3 words. I feel it. Just that. So I can see how many of us are in the middle of the crossing rather than pretending we have already arrived. And give this a like if it moved something real. The next video continues into the other side of this crossing, what the relationships look like that form after the transition, and how to recognize the people who can meet the actual person rather than the persona. It is the peace that makes the crossing worth it. I will see you there.